now, moving on to the next slide, of course, we have Rob Goldiez, who's going to talk to us about Scott Fetzer. Scott Fetzer is a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, so you have here the big, small, and in between. And I think I won't steal any of Rob's thunder here and let him talk about Scott Fetzer and what they've done in the last couple months. And welcome, Rob, to tell you a little bit about Scott Fetzer and their implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. So good morning, everyone. This is Rob Goldiez. I'm the general manager at SFEG, as we like to call ourselves. We're part of Scott Fetzer, which is part of Berkshire Hathaway. What I want to talk about today is a little bit who we are, just so you have some background in the context of what we were trying to accomplish by moving to the cloud and moving to Kenandy, why we chose to change horses in terms of ERP providers, and why that entailed moving to the cloud, our experience in that transition, and then our plans, some things we've already done and some things we continue to work on and plan to do to exploit the technology that we have available with Kenandy and Salesforce and some other things that we're doing. And so who we are, we're a manufacturer of power-related products. What does that mean? We make and sell right here in Middle Tennessee, outside of Nashville. We make transformers, motors, motion control products. So our products, the things that we produce, go into very large-scale HP printers, 3D systems, 3D printers, go into GE and Whirlpool appliances. We have transformers that light up old-school neon signs for P.F. Chang's, Wells Fargo, Enterprise Rental Car, and various companies like that. We're no different than many other manufacturing companies. We had legacy systems, outdated business processes, competition from China, competition from Mexico, so a lot of foreign competition, but had great products and a great history and great legacy. And prior to 2010, we operated as, SFEG operated as 3 separate business units under Scott Fetzer, and in 2010, there was an effort to consolidate those 3 different unique brands into what is now SFEG. Next slide. So this is, in some way real, but some way not real, right? So the system that we were on previously was literally written in the 80s. Obviously, there have been updates to it. I like to call it the green screen. It was written around the time that these IBM PCs were out, and people use terminal emulators, and so the people that had been here a long time knew how to do it. They knew that if you hit F5, tab, menu 6, that you could get into XYZ information about a customer or a sales order. But the problem is, as companies hire and staff turns over, is you get people that are coming to work with iPhones, right? They expect to be able to point, click, touch, not need to read a user manual, not need to go ask for help. That they expect technology to just work and it just to make sense. And so employees' expectations have changed. One of the other observations that I made when I joined the organization was that our system of record, our business system, was it was a system of record, but a lot of activity was happening outside of it. And so approvals happened outside of the system. Sales orders, purchase orders, everything was being filed with paper. A lot of offline analysis happening in Excel or other means. And so as soon as things happen offline, they're out of date. They're potentially out of sync. You're communicating via emails to reference purchase orders that people then have to take the email to go to the purchase order to see what somebody's talking about. And so a lot of activity happening outside of the system. The other piece, before we get to the next slide, is, in terms of why cloud. So we were running our old business system on an AS400 in our server room. We had to deal with backups. We had to deal with disaster recovery plans. We had to deal with one person that was essentially the expert in that system. And so anytime I wanted a report, I wanted data, I wanted information, or virtually anyone else on the executive team, you have to go to the gatekeeper, so to speak, who knows how to write the report to pull the data from the database and give you an Excel spreadsheet. And then when it's not quite what you want, you go back to them. And so you iterate through this process, and you have a bottleneck with one person. And so we wanted to find a new solution that was collaborative, that was mobile, that was We didn't have to worry about hardware, that it was easy enough to use that people can write their own reports, people can write their own dashboards, and things like mobility were out of the box. So if we move forward to the next slide, some of our checklists in terms of why the cloud and why switch systems, right? We wanted real-time reporting and dashboards that users can use, that users can write. So we didn't have to go to a gatekeeper. And when I say real-time, real-time, there's no, we're not relying on batch jobs to run in the background or overnight to know, if we want to look at an income statement today for how the month is performing, we can pull up an income statement today to look at how the month, how we're doing. Electronic workflows and approvals, all the things that were happening offline, how do we get them into the system? How do we put workflows and approvals around purchase orders that follow our business rules, so that if I want to see why do we have XYZ material on our shop floor, I can go trace that back and see who bought it, how it was approved, when it was approved. Collaboration was very important. Instead of having all this activity happening offline on email in conversations, we wanted a way to collaborate around objects, I'll say, that a Salesforce term. And so if there's discussion around a purchase order, have that happen on the purchase order. If there's a discussion about a sales order, or how, can we accelerate a schedule for a customer, have that happen on the sales order. So there's no referring back and forth between an email and a sales order, or an email and a purchase order, or an email and a work order. Another thing that was very important was enforcement of business logic and business rules. In terms of, as they talked about earlier, having the ability to write and implement business rules that make sense, that are enforced, and that there's transparency to. And so there's a lot of capabilities in Salesforce and in Kenandy where you can turn on history tracking very simply. You can put in place business rules so that you can see how the business is performing, why things are happening, and have full traceability into how you got to the current state. We wanted the ability to automate repetitive tasks and mundane tasks. Every business has this, but the more you can simplify things, whether it's putting a lot of steps behind a single button click, or doing things as far as Big Heart Pets did, we wanted the ability, whether it was at go live or later, to put in place automation around repetitive office tasks. No hardware, I mentioned this earlier, right? We don't need to be buying and maintaining hardware and paying service contracts to IBM for AS400s. That's not our expertise. We even since I've been here, we've had power outages and things like that related to things going on in the city. And when that happens, the whole business is essentially shut down. And so not having hardware and being able to rely on somebody like Salesforce to host all that is a huge burden relief. And then finally, mobile. I mean, employees expect it. Everybody comes to work with iPhones or Android phones, and they expect things to be mobile. Next slide. So these are my kind of different smiley faces and reactions as we were moving to Kenandy. So our implementation for us was a 4-month process. It was what the folks at Kenandy scoped out initially. We kept to that schedule, and we went live in 4 months. And so I'll say, I've got the smiley face with the cool shades on. Everything went well during implementation. We worked with Kenandy to figure out what it was important and what was critical for go live versus what were things that we would do later as the business continued to evolve. And then, you get to that point, if any of you have switched business systems, that as soon as you make the cutover, we did a cold cutover, right? We had our date, November 1st is when we were going to switch over. And November 1st, the old system was essentially shut down to only administrative access, and the new system, Kenandy, went live. And there was a lot of nervousness and panic, like any system, right? As I like to say, the coffee cup moved from the right side of the desk to the left side of the desk, and people now had to use their mouth instead of knowing these shortcuts. And we did a lot of training and stuff, but there was a lot of issues around that we had to deal with around data migration, how data, came out of the old system and whether it was correct there. And so there was a lot of internal angst, I'll say, amongst the employees as we made the switch over. But every day, every week, things settled out and issues got cleaned up and data integrity got cleaned up. And then we went through a period, I'd say around the end of the year, where things were calm and people were getting the hang of it. And then since then, really since the beginning of the year, is when we've started to, say, exploit the capabilities. And so as users with the proper access, obviously, we now can rapidly test new business logic and roll out shortcuts and automations very quickly. And so we will, you know, for example, right, since going live on Kenandy, we've automated approvals around journal entries. Previously, those were done offline. We've automated document generation around purchase orders and sales orders. So now employees no longer have to click certain buttons at the end of those steps. And so once a purchase order gets approved, for example, the document is already generated waiting for them. The next step is to go ahead and automatically send that out to the supply base. Those are little things that can be done on Kenandy on the Salesforce platform by us, right? We can go consult with Kenandy as we have questions about how things work, but you don't need to be experts. If you can use a mouse and if you've used other systems before, these are things that you can do as users, obviously with the appropriate access rights. And so we've done a lot since the beginning of the year around implementing new business rules around how stock flows through the factory, to little automation tips and tricks and things like that, like to track a package that we ship out to a customer. Instead of having to take a tracking number and go to FedEx to track it, right, we put in some business logic that knows if it's a FedEx shipment with a FedEx tracking number, this button is going to just go ahead and track that for you. Next slide. And so our plans going forward, right, the first kind of third of that slide is we continue to try to build out additional automation capabilities and tools for mobility around Kenandy and Salesforce. And that literally is a screenshot I took of the Salesforce application with Kenandy inside of it from my phone. We're doing a lot here at SFEG around shop floor automation, and have implemented and continue to buy and implement automation to enhance our productivity, improve our competitiveness, and give more tools to our shop floor employees. And so one of the things that we're doing around that automation is building some technology in-house to talk to our robots and collect data from our robots to eventually report production, have robots report production to Kenandy. And so as a robot finishes making a part, that it will essentially signal to Kenandy that it produced. Again, to tie the shop floor and what's happening on the shop floor to the system. And all of that becomes far easier when you're using cloud applications that have standardized APIs where you can tweak and customize workflows, approvals, triggers, all those types of things. And then the third side, the third piece of it is new product development and exploiting the connected world. So as I like to tell my employees here, we make dumb products today. Right? When we ship our product out, it is no longer talking to us, providing any feedback to us about how it's being used, the ability to do firmware updates, all that doesn't exist today. And so there's a big push internally here to make our products smarter so that when we ship out a brushless DC motor, let's say, to HP, and HP puts these in these very large printers that go around the world, that they can report back to us how they're being used. And so what we're going after is making not just our products smarter, but tying that back to the data that's in Kenandy and Salesforce so that we can start to take advantage of the connected world and know how our customers' products are performing. And with that, I think that's the end of my part, and I'll turn this back over to Stuart for questions.